All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We're diving into a really relevant issue today, I think, especially for those of you out there leading tech and cybersecurity, especially in the SMB space. We're talking about something that's been called, security platform fatigue or security tool sprawl. And, it's something that I think a lot of folks are dealing with, but it's not always clear what the best way to kind of break it down and figure out what to do is.
Yeah.
Recently, there was a HelpNet security article that pointed this out as a real serious problem, especially for CISOs. And there's this crazy stat too from a 6sense survey they did in 2023, and they found that 68% of organizations are using more than 11 endpoint management and security tools.
Wow.
So that's a lot, right? I mean, that's a huge amount of technology to have to manage and oversee.
Yep.
And so that's what we're going to try to unpack today. Like why should you as a tech leader or a cyber leader, especially at a small or medium business, why should you care about this? What is it and what can you actually do about it?
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just acknowledging it. That stat right there, 11 tools. I would almost guarantee you that most organizations have even more than that if they really sat down and counted them all, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But the problem really boils down to, having too many tools that don't talk to each other, right? It creates so much noise, so much alert fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, analysts are just bombarded with notifications all the time. It's overwhelming. And really the big risk there is that you miss something critical, right? You miss a real threat because you're just drowning in all this noise. And I mean, think about it. Think about the daily pressures your security team is already under, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just sifting through all these alerts, that's a full-time job in itself sometimes.
Yeah, it really can be. And it's not even just the alerts themselves, right? I mean, we also see just a lot of duplication.
Right.
Where organizations they're essentially paying for the same functionality across multiple different tools, and sometimes they don't even realize it, right?
Exactly. And that's budget that could be used elsewhere, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you could be investing in training your team or maybe even, just giving them a bonus or something.
For sure.
Just to show them that you appreciate all the hard work they're doing. But instead, you're wasting it on redundant tools.
Yeah, it's like, having a dozen different remote controls for your TV, right?
Yeah.
Like why, it just gets so complicated, so inefficient. And I think one of the most important things I read recently about this was this idea of the illusion of visibility. This was Jonathan Gill, the CEO of Panacea, and he was saying that because each of these tools can only see a small part of your overall environment, you might be making critical security decisions based on bad information,
Yeah, that's such a critical point, right? Like, you might think everything is fine because each tool is saying, "Hey, no problems here," right? But you might be missing the big picture. You might be missing those connections between all these different events happening across your infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's almost like having blinders on.
Yeah.
You're only seeing a little sliver of what's really going on.
Yeah. So we're not just talking about inconvenience here. We're talking about real, potentially really huge security risk, right?
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears for a second and talk about why is this so important financially and strategically? Like, why should a business leader, care about this?
Yeah. Well, for starters, budgets are tight, right? Everyone is looking to save money. And security budgets are definitely under the microscope these days.
Yeah, boards and CFOs are really scrutinizing everything.
Right. And for good reason, right? You've got to be able to justify every dollar you spend. So consolidating your security tools is one way to do that, right? It's a way to show that you're being smart with your resources.
So how does that actually work? Like, how does consolidating tools save money?
Well, in a few ways, right? I mean, first of all, you're going to have lower hardware costs.
Okay.
You don't need as many servers. You don't need as much storage space. You're also going to reduce your maintenance overhead. You're not paying for support contracts for a bunch of different tools.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, there's licensing.
Mm-hmm.
If you can consolidate down to fewer vendors, you're going to have fewer licenses to pay for. And a lot of times, you can get a better deal on those licenses if you're buying them in bulk.
So it's not just about kind of the immediate cost savings. I mean, it's also about being able to kind of go to the board or the CFO and say, hey, look, we're being responsible here. We're saving money, but we're also improving our security.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's about building trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about showing that you're taking security seriously and that you're being strategic about it.
Yeah.
And when you can do that, it makes it a lot easier to get buy-in for future security investments.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
sure.
you're not just coming to them with your hand out saying, we need more money. You're coming to them with a plan.
Yeah, so it's not just about kind of cleaning up the back office, so to speak, right? It's really about positioning security for success in the long term.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned before that reducing tool sprawl is a strategic move. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's about more than just saving money,
Right.
right? It's about fundamentally improving your security posture. When you have a more integrated, more streamlined security environment, you're just more effective at everything, right? You're better at preventing attacks.
Yeah.
You're better at detecting them. You're better at responding to them.
And that kind of leads to a stronger defense overall.
Exactly. You're more resilient. You're more robust. And that's what you need
Yeah.
in today's world, right? The threats are constantly evolving, so you need to be able to evolve with them.
Yeah, and especially today, it's not just about security being a cost of doing business. It's really a strategic advantage.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be a differentiator, right? It can set you apart from your competitors.
Hmm.
If you can show your customers and your partners that you take security seriously, that's a huge plus. It builds trust. It builds confidence. And then there's the whole issue of risk management.
Right.
I mean, if you can demonstrate that you're managing risk effectively, that's going to be a big selling point to investors, to potential acquirers.
Sure.
It shows that you're a well-run organization. You're thinking about the long term.
Okay, so we kind of understand the problem. We understand why it matters. Now
Mhm.
let's talk about like what do we do? What are some concrete steps that folks can take, to address this tool sprawl?
Yeah. So the first thing to understand is that consolidation doesn't necessarily mean going with one vendor for everything.
Okay.
I mean, that would be great in theory, but in reality, it's rarely the best approach.
Right.
So I think a better way to think about it is a two-part strategy, right? You've got leveraging a major security provider, and then you've got strategically filling the gaps.
Okay, so walk us through that. What does that first part look like?
So for a lot of your core security needs, things like endpoint protection, firewalls, email security, that kind of stuff, you're going to want to partner with a primary vendor.
Okay.
And there are a few reasons for that. I mean, first of all, their solutions are usually designed to work together really well. So you get better integration, you get better data correlation, which gives you a much clearer view of your overall security landscape.
So less integration headaches, less compatibility issues, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It just makes things a lot easier to manage. And then, of course, there are the operational benefits, right?
Okay.
When you have a centralized platform, everything is just simpler, right? It's easier to administer, it's easier to configure, it's easier to report on.
And your team can focus on more important things, right?
Exactly. They can focus on the proactive stuff,
Yeah.
the stuff that's really going to make a difference. And then, of course, there's the cost savings, which we talked about before.
Right.
Fewer vendors, fewer contracts, fewer licenses. It all adds up.
Now, what about the impact on the team itself? Like, how does this affect the security folks on the ground?
Well, one of the biggest benefits is that it reduces the training burden.
Okay.
Your team doesn't have to learn how to use a bunch of different tools.
Mhm.
They can focus on mastering a smaller set of integrated tools.
So they can really become experts in those tools.
Exactly. And that makes them more effective, more efficient. And it also helps with morale,
Oh.
I mean, nobody likes feeling overwhelmed. Nobody likes feeling like they're constantly playing catch up.
Right.
So by giving them a more manageable set of tools to work with, you're giving them the opportunity to really excel.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got this primary provider handling most of our needs. What about the second part of that strategy, the filling the gaps part?
Yeah, so no vendor is perfect, right? There are always going to be gaps in their offerings.
Right.
And there are also going to be times when you have very specific needs that just aren't met by any off-the-shelf solution.
Okay, so how do you identify those gaps? Where do you even start?
Well, the first step is to do a really thorough inventory of all your existing tools.
Okay.
Figure out what you have, figure out what you're actually using, figure out what you're not using.
So know what you have before you go shopping for more stuff?
Exactly. And then once you've done that, you need to talk to your team, right? Find out
Mhm.
what tools they love, what tools they hate, what tools they never use.
So get that real world feedback, right?
Exactly. Because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, it's your team that's using these tools, so their opinion matters.
for sure.
And then once you've got a good handle on what your gaps are, you can start looking for solutions to fill them.
Okay. And what should you be looking for in those solutions?
Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure that they integrate well with your primary platform.
Right. Because we don't want to create more silos.
Exactly. You want to avoid creating more data silos.
Yeah.
And then you also want to make sure that you're focusing on the specific risks that your organization faces.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just go out and buy the latest, greatest security gadget.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that it's actually going to address a real need. Then finally, don't underestimate the value of training.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to improve your security is to just train your team on how to use the tools they already have more effectively.
Yeah, sometimes it's not about buying new stuff. It's about using what you have better.
Exactly.
Okay, so all of this is about building a solid foundation of visibility, right?
It really is. I mean, as Moray J. Haber from Beyond Trust said, the biggest challenge for CISOs is visibility.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way to perform any action to remediate a flaw, stop a security incident, or provide forensics without visibility.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know what's going on in your environment, you're basically flying blind.
And a consolidated strategy, building around that primary provider, adding those
Yeah.
strategic tools, that helps to kind of bring everything into focus, right?
Exactly. It gives you that single pane of glass view that everyone's always talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're evaluating potential solutions, one of those important questions to ask is, how well does this integrate with my existing infrastructure?
Right.
You don't want to end up with another data silo. You want something that's going to play nicely with everything else.
So it's not just about having a bunch of tools, it's about having the right tools and making sure that they all work together.
Exactly.
And this kind of leads to the idea of redefining security maturity, right?
It does. I mean, security maturity isn't about how many tools you have.
Right.
It's about how well you can respond to incidents, how well you can communicate about security events, and how well you can recover from breaches.
Those are really the key things, right?
They are. And a big part of achieving that level of maturity is having a streamlined, well-integrated security environment.
So consolidation is really a key piece of that puzzle.
It is. I mean, when you reduce the complexity, when you increase visibility, when you streamline your workflows, you just make it easier for your team to do their jobs effectively.
Yeah, it frees them up to focus on the things that really matter.
Exactly.
All right. So for everyone listening today, don't think of reducing your tool set as a sign of weakness or cutting corners. It's actually a really smart, really strategic move.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's about strengthening your security. It's about simplifying your life. And it's about getting better control of your costs.
And those are all things that any leader, whether you're in tech or cybersecurity or anywhere else, those are all things that you should care about.
Absolutely.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about all the different security tools that your organization is using right now.
Yeah.
Where could you consolidate? Where could you streamline things? What's the one area where making a change would have the biggest impact on your security and on your team's efficiency?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
It is. It's a really good starting point for having those conversations and figuring out what the best path forward is for your organization. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for this deep dive,
It's been a pleasure.
and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.